Welcome to the World Cup Mood Board. I'm Jarrod Kimber. This is all part of 99.94. Well, what a day for Irish cricket. Again, I suppose. There are actually so many Ireland upsets now that it's easy to see a game like this and just think to yourself, well, this is just another victory. But it's not, for many different reasons. The first is that any win by Ireland over anyone wearing an England shirt in anything is something quite important to Irish culture. There is a lot of history on side. I mean, Google it, you'll see what I'm talking about here. And they're certainly not the only country that has history with England within cricket. In fact, you could say that almost all of them. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. But it's a huge thing. They're, very close geographically. They are the small neighbours, not to mention that they hated England so much as a country that they actually invented their own sports to get away from them. Which is a little different than the rest of us who, even if our nations had problems with England, we just copied their sports more or less. There's always been cricket in Ireland. For those who are not aware, it's been going on for a very long time now. If you don't believe me, you can look up the time that Ireland skittled West Indies for 25 runs at Sion Mills. Supermen! I do like that headline. Sorry, couldn't help myself but showing that one. But cricket did struggle in Ireland for a very long time as well, at least in part because it was English sport, a big part because it was an English sport. And that means that cricket in Ireland probably didn't develop the way that we, would all have hoped it would have, or certainly those who are Irish cricket fans would have hoped it would have. Rule 27 was actually known as the ban, and it essentially tried to stop people playing non-Irish sports. It was originally rugby, football, and hockey, but cricket was added to that list very soon after the ban was first come out. So it does sort of tell you that they have been playing cricket in in Ireland for a very long time, but at the same time, there's always been something kind of holding it back. And so when Ireland win a game like today, it should always remain as a thing of joy and wonderment that it actually happened at all, against everything that we've seen. Obviously, they have won against Ireland a few other times. We've got the Kevin O'Brien game, pink hair, all that sort of stuff. And then we've also got the, just recently they won an ODI during the COVID bubble against the second string England side as well. And so these aren't as rare as they used to be, but I don't think that should mean that they are necessarily less important because of where Irish cricket has come from, how it's got to this moment, and what this actually means for Irish cricket back home. Them beating any major team, we saw it when they beat South Africa, we saw it when they beat the West Indies, we've seen it many different times before, is a huge deal. But there is obviously something very special about them beating England at cricket. And this is a good England side as well. We're about to find out how good. But they've been favourites or thereabouts for this tournament pretty much, since the odds first went up. Yes, they have injuries, of course, and we can talk about DLS a lot. Not to mention that England quite obviously misunderstood this wicket to a comical degree. But it's also worth saying, if you look at this game today, Ireland were smarter than England. They read the conditions beneath them better. They read the conditions above them better. And they just played the better cricket throughout the game. Better, and better. That's a lot of betterness. This is an England team that has been thinking very smart about T20 cricket for a long time now. And Ireland just completely towed up the new management group of Butler and Mott. That's the cricket side of it, right? But let's just enjoy the fact that Ireland beat England here. Put it this way, if you're having a bit of a rough time in your life, there are things not going your way, even if you just stubbed your toe, whatever's going on in your life right now, remember that this is the day that Ireland beat England. I think that's a beautiful thing, unless you're an English fan and you're throwing up in your mouth right now. Let's move on to Andy Balbirnie. The first time I heard about Andy Balbirnie was in hushed tones by Irish officials. And I'll be honest, I didn't really get it. They were talking about him as if he was the meaning of life, the answer to all of Irish cricket's problems. And like, you'd look up his record and you'd be like, he hasn't really done anything. And he wasn't young either. He'd been playing for quite a long time. And if you look at his professional career, he barely got on the field. Some of this is because he wasn't good enough to be picked. Some of this is injury as well. But this is a guy who, when I was being told these things, it's probably around the middle of 2017, and you're looking back going, well, when's Andy Balbirnie going to start playing professional cricket regularly? He can be the cure for cancer, but at a certain point, you've got to put him in a test tube. I'm assuming that's how we would cure cancer. Anyway, I'm not really sure. At the start of 2018, which is an important year in Irish cricket because that's when they first played their first men's test. At that stage, he'd played 95 professional games. But if you go back slightly before that, you could see that he didn't really play any in 2016. And 2015 is really the only year in his career at that point he'd played a lot of cricket. And there's no doubt that he was about to hit his peak batting age, but there was nothing in his record that was saying that, we're about to see anything particularly special from someone about to hit their peak batting age, right? And so this was his record up until the start of 2018. He had a first-class average of under 30. He had a List A average slightly below that. And in T20 cricket, he was very disappointing. He was also striking at around 112, I think, at that stage as well. So it wasn't like he had a strike rate of 140. This was just a player who had not developed at all. And clearly there were signs he could play. He went to the Under-19 World Cup twice, which is certainly something. Shows you how good he was at a very young age. He was picked up at Middlesex at a very young age, originally through their academy system, and then he was given a contract when he was still a teenager there. But he never really made it at Middlesex. Everyone sort of thought he would, but it never really happened. He was stuck in the second 11 for a long time. There were some good players in Middlesex's first 11 at that time, but even so. And then when that Middlesex deal ended, there was no rush from other counties to try and snap him up or anything, right? He just sort of faded away at that point. And there was a couple of reasons. One, he'd never done anything, as we spoke about before. And the second thing was hip injuries. It was bad enough to scupper two good runs that he had. So 2015, 2016 is part of that is getting an operation on his hip. 2017, again, he was slowed down by problems with his hip. And what you had was a player who had been never fulfilled his potential from a young age, who'd had a serious hip injury at least once, maybe twice by that point, and had never really played much county cricket, or really even that much for Ireland. And when he had played for Ireland, he wasn't particularly good at all. Now, if you're looking at all that and you're going, wait a minute, Jarrod, I think he's pretty good right now. That's because things obviously change. This graph on the right here, this is from the start of 2018 until the middle of 2021. This is something I did on him a while back. This is the leading ODI run scorers in the entire world. And there is Andy Balbirnie, fairly high up on that list as well. And then on the left, what you have is his average in List A cricket. You can see up until 2018, he was averaging 27, I think it was. Look at the leap that he makes after that. I mean, that's a very good thing. And on top of that, a lot of that early List A cricket was kind of here or there against lower quality teams. A lot of that List A cricket afterwards, is much higher quality, especially as Ireland starts playing better cricket themselves. There's just absolutely no doubt that Balbirnie just became a completely different cricketer when he finally did mature and his hips started helping him as well. Having said all that, he can still struggle for long periods of times, and it's probably what's held him back from playing franchise cricket. At his best, he looks like a genuine international quality player. At his worst, sometimes he can be non-existent. And I think England would have to say that today, he was probably more towards his best than his worst. And when you look at him and you think about everything that I've just told you, remember that if Ireland wasn't professional in 2008, Balbirnie would be currently in an office somewhere in Dublin or wherever in Ireland, Cork, I don't know, random places in Ireland. But he'd be in an office, right, trying to explain to the intern how he's close personal friends with Owen Morgan, right? I mean, that is how what professionalism has done for Ireland. This was a rejected professional player who had injury problems, who had never shown anything, that much at all around the age of 25, 26, 27. And he has just gone out there and produced one of the best victories for Irish cricket. And he is, in himself, one of the best victories for current Irish cricket. Balbirnie went from a second string county reject player with bad hips to a man who just beat England at the MCG in a World Cup. I wasn't pausing for effect. If you looked away from the screen just then, I was coughing. Kind of ruins the whole effect of doing the mute when you explain that you've done a cough. But let's just do a little bit more on Balbirnie and Tucker and that particular partnership, because I've told you why it matters historically. But let's look at what Ireland did to win this particular game. Balbirnie hadn't been in particularly great form over the last little stretch of his career. But in Ireland's other big win in this tournament against the West Indies, he showed certainly where he was, what he was capable of. I would say he hit the ball much better in that game, but obviously that was a slightly better pitch as well. He had an opening partnership of 73 in that game, where he hit 37 from 23. Paul Stirling sort of got them going, and then Balbirnie took over, went out, and Stirling got them home. But today, he was absolutely the key man, and his 62 from 47 was practically double what anyone else in this match managed to get. Stirling went out in the third over, and there's a lot of times when Stirling goes and Ireland's batting just doesn't look like it's got anything left. But Balbirnie played a very calm, in control innings. The sort of innings we've seen a lot in this tournament so far, of a player who would probably prefer to be smashing the ball everywhere, but can't do that. And so certainly slowing himself down, staying on control, and just turning the strike over to Lorcan Tucker. And it's worth talking about him, who had two incredible balls to begin with from Mark Wood, and then started to bat really good from then on in. He played a brilliant ramp shot that went for 4, and he took 11 runs from Wokes' second over as well. And the shot of the match, though, came really from Sam Curran, where he just punched him over mid-on. Perfect technique and everything else. There's a reason why everyone in Ireland is so excited about Lorcan Tucker. I always have to, because Tucker and Tector have come through at the same time, I always have to check to make sure I've said the right one. I think I'm saying Tucker today. Balbirnie was there as well, of course, and savaged Wokes at one point, scoring 16 runs by himself in one particular over, from the 10th, in fact. Now, if you just look at the run rate, you can see that this section where I've put Balbirnie and Tucker is kind of different to the rest of the game, right? There's no doubt that Ireland were already going pretty well, but after Stirling, the run rate actually does go up, and it stays around that high level for a long time before obviously there's a bit of a dip towards the end. And it was really this Crick infograph just shows that this was the difference between the two teams on the day, even if Ireland did some other things really good as well. And talking about the other things, it's worth pointing out that this partnership could have gone on for a lot longer. Sadly for Ireland, it was ended by one of those unfortunate run out at the non-strikers end off the bowler's fingers. You can actually just see there Tucker's sad face looking back at the ball. Those dismissals are pretty unlucky at the best of times. I think this one seemed even more so, with Rashid actually slightly trying to stop the ball and deflecting it perfectly back onto the stumps. But also, it wasn't hit as hard. Sometimes those just happen in a camera flash, right? The bowler puts his hand down and there's fingertips and it goes onto the stumps. You could see that Rashid actually did a full dive to get to the ball, and it wasn't smashed. There was some time left. It was just that poor Lorcan Tucker was just too far out of his ground. But that partnership, anyway, they made 82, and that was, more than half of Ireland's total, and that was kind of the game. We said a lot of nice things about Ireland. Shall we move on to England? There's no doubt that England as a team, as a fan base, as a everything, turned up to the MCG with one eye on Friday's game against Australia. They have a chance if they beat Australia to probably knock them out of the tournament. And there's no doubt that they were thinking about that as one of the favourite teams. Of course, that went horribly, horribly wrong when when Ireland played so well in this particular game, and it now looks like England is the team that might be struggling to make it through to the next round. There certainly, I think their odds now are currently the same as Australia's, whereas they were a lot shorter than Australia's were before this game. I can tell you that. Um, uh, they had talked a lot in this game about not underestimating Ireland, and also, most importantly, being prepared to adapt to the situations out on the field. I'm not sure if they did really underestimate Ireland. You could argue, though, they did not really adapt to the situations out on this field. And this is going to be an important topic all the way through. The more we see of this World Cup, the more we see that each ground seems to be throwing up something random because of the overhead conditions, because of the pitch conditions, because of the dimensions. You really do have to, think a little bit more. This is not just turn up at the ground and try and hit sixes and, execute your slower balls at the end. There's a lot going on in this at the moment. And you'd have to say that that's not how England played particularly well today. The DLS pass score was ahead of them. It was up on the screen in 20-foot high numbers all the way through the innings, and yet they couldn't get there. Despite the depth of their batting lineup, and they could play as aggressive as they want, they just couldn't get the ball away. Now, some of that goes to the Ireland bowlers, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But when they did eventually try and kick on, it was too late and cost them the game, and they were 5 runs behind the DLS at that point. It did feel like they just there was a very interesting moment. Actually, I'll talk about that in a moment. But it did feel like there was Dawood Milan and some of the other players were trying to score, right. They obviously could see the DLS total, but it felt that they were unable, and some of that is just the quality of the bowling and also what the pitch was doing. Shall we talk about the one good thing out of England? I almost want to say England's whole World Cup at this stage. It's a bit unfair because they won their previous game, but England are just much more of a fun side with Mark Wood there. There's no doubt about that. And in the last game, you could say they're a better side with Mark Wood as well at the moment. I don't think they could afford to have him not being playing. But in the last game, Wood bowled the fastest 4-over spell in the T20 World Cup history. He was regularly over 150 kilometers here, and he was potent as well. Like, it was good. The ball that dismissed Harry Tech, it was 153 kilometers an hour, so that's at 95 miles per hour. And the one that got Curtis Camphor was 151 kilometers an hour. And those are two, in Tech's case, he's the future of Ireland batting and a very, very good player. And Camphor is someone who grew up in South Africa and has seen fast bowling before. Doesn't really matter where you're from if someone is bowling over 150 kilometers an hour. No one's really used to facing that, though, are they? That high pace does things to players. Let's just be honest. In fact, you can ask any of 99.94 Zone, Mitch Johnson's former victims from England in 2013-14 or South Africa from 2013-14. And twice Wood hit someone in the head. And the Delaney one almost went for a boundary just off his skull. So incredible pace. Unfortunately for Wood, he didn't really get much support from the rest of his bowlers. And in fact, we'll go on to England bowling now. In some ways, as we've already said, Ireland won the game with the bat by getting ahead. But it is important to have a look at it, especially by how much England struggled with the ball. Chris Woakes, in particular, had a horror show in this particular game. His first 2 overs went for 23 runs. Sam Curran's first over then went for 14. And England conceded 59 for 1 in the power play. And that was including, Ben Stokes, who again started the game quite well with the ball in this new role that I completely fully endorse until it goes completely wrong. But I'm certainly on the side of that at the moment. On a pitch that seemed not quite as bouncy as the one for India-Pakistan, England looked guilty of overpitching, and I'll try and show you that as close as I can here. So, obviously, we have Ireland on one side, we have England on the other side. Ireland bowled 10% of their balls full, right? England bowled about 5% of their balls as full tosses or Yorkers, meaning they're really bowling full, and then another 22% full. So they bowled over a quarter of their deliveries on that full length or ahead, compared to 10% of Ireland's. Now, to be fair to Ireland, they had the ability to watch what England were doing in that particular game. But there's no doubt that Ireland basically tried to bowl a good length, which you can see over 50% of their balls were in a good length and occasionally a hard length. And just very rarely they would bowl a short ball. Whereas England bowled really, really full, almost half as many short balls, and just kind of never found a length for any of their seam bowlers that they were completely happy with. Now, only other thing I would throw in here is that Ireland's bowlers are a little bit more the same than, obviously Mark Wood through to Sam Curran is a slightly different kettle of fish. But on this pitch, it looked like there was a length to hit. And you'd have to say that the England bowlers didn't particularly hit it. And if you look at their figures, Ben Stokes obviously did very, very well. But look at Chris Woakes and look at Sam Curran. Even Mark Wood, who we said bowled very well, went at 8.5 and over. But it was really those other two seamers that struggled to find the right length consistently on this wicket. This also flows into England's second problem, which is, as we've talked about on the mood board quite a few times, Ireland are not particularly good against spin. Clearly, England had spin available to them, but they waited a very long time to be able to do that. And the 10th over when Woakes came back on might have been a very good time for England to bring spin on, and instead Balbirnie smashed 16 off it. And when they did turn to spin, have a look what happened. Adil Rashid is barely hit off the square here, and Liam Livingstone took 3 for 17, and that was part of the big collapse that Ireland had towards the end there. Unfortunately, by that point, as we now found out, that the Ireland team was already in front. So even if they did get bowled out within their 20 overs, that damage was done a little bit too late. So just to recap, England's bowling. Their seamers didn't use the facilities very well, which were in their favour, and then they kept bowling them, knowing that Ireland struggle against spin. They finally give the tweakers a go, and Ireland bowled out within 20 overs. I mean, that's a team meeting that should be very fun. But it should also be pointed out, just to go back to how well Ireland bowled here, that England tried to get ahead of the DLS the whole time. In fact, English journalist Tim Wigmore asked Liam Livingstone if the plan was to try and get in front of DLS. And apparently Liam Livingstone did not take that question very well. But yes, the plan was to be above the DLS. They couldn't because of how good Ireland bowled against them. And, that's completely full credit to them. And apparently Liam Livingstone told Tim Wigmore that it was a stupid question. I wasn't there. I'm just passing on the information as it comes to me. Sorry, Wiggo. And then we go to the other game, which of course was not a game, the washout game. One thing I would say is that this is an absolute shit show of a points table at the moment. Group 1 looks like Jackson Pollock started throwing paint in a canvas and then got bored halfway through and just went and had a nap. New Zealand is on top. New Zealand is on top, but it's not like they're feeling particularly good about the world at the moment. They beat Australia and then they lose a point they probably had penciled in against Afghanistan. So that's not ideal. But we've just had so many weird results in this group so far. Australia losing to New Zealand, not the biggest upset in the world, but certainly it wasn't what most people expected. Then England lose to Ireland, and now New Zealand wash out against Afghanistan. It means that Afghanistan being on the bottom of this points table is about the only thing that makes any sense at the moment when you look at this particular group. And they haven't played Sri Lanka or Ireland yet. So even they'll be, hoping to do something. In fact, after watching England play today, Afghanistan might be thinking that there's even something in that game for them. The washout on its own, though, is really, really interesting because the washout is great news for England and Australia because it drains 1 point from the Kiwis. However, the Ireland win is great news for New Zealand and Australia, giving them a current advantage over England in that they haven't lost to any of the lower ranked teams. So there's this sort of cycle of all these different things that are going on at the same time that, New Zealand beating Australia is great news for New Zealand and England, right? There's this circle in this group of every time a team gets an advantage from one game, it seems to disappear almost straight away, which is fascinating to watch. Also, all of this is good news for Sri Lanka. Not because they're second on the points table at the moment, because obviously that doesn't matter too much now. But if they can keep a seamer on the field, and to be honest, I'm pretty doubtful that they can even find 3 seamers for the next game at this point. But if they can, they might suddenly find themselves in a position to slide into the World Cup, DMs come semi-final time, right? It's opening up in a really weird and random way. I mean, even Ireland must be thinking, well, we only need a couple of results to go our way from here on in, and things can open up for us. Afghanistan will be thinking that too. Ireland play Afghanistan next, so maybe we'll be thinking about them. So both of those teams are about to get a cold cup of coffee, whoever loses, although could be a washout as well. While Australia and England play next in what now looks more and more like a quarter-final, although, as I've just said, it's all to play for almost everyone at the moment. And the New Zealand-Sri Lanka game, which probably, a few days ago, before Australia played New Zealand, you looked at that Sri Lanka-New Zealand game and you thought, it's a game. Maybe one of these teams is pushing for a semi-final. It's important to one of them. That's currently a very important game for both of those teams. Sri Lanka lost to Australia. If they can beat New Zealand, they can literally just toss, the group into the air even more so. And just on this World Cup, so me and Bharat did the podcast, I think, last week, and where we were talking about how this is the Underdog World Cup so far. And that was because after the first 4 games, there were 3 results that went probably against the grain, or certainly against what the bookies thought. It's continued to do that though, right? Like, not at the same regularity. But if you can see here, I've put up all the games from the World Cup so far, and I've put up underdog win and underdog won. There's a couple of more, I don't know, which Scotland, Zimbabwe. I think the odds had Scotland as favourites going into that game. It's not a massive upset, and not all of these are massive upsets. But this is still feels like a lot of games where the less favoured team has actually gone on to win so far. And I've seen a lot of people moaning about the rain, and look, I get it. I'm moaning about the rain as well. But this has been a spectacularly interesting World Cup so far. We didn't know the pitches would be like this. We couldn't have guessed there'd be that many interesting games, already played, considering there should be a few more interesting ones to come. And this Group 1 is getting a little bit like, a little kid is deciding on who's going to win each individual game and what's going to happen next. This World Cup has been absolutely nuts so far. And I'm enjoying every crazy minute of it. Anyway, so there we go. There is the end of the World Cup mood board for today, but let us get to your questions. There was a couple lined up early on. Imad says, would you rank Ireland, Afghanistan above or below West Indies? Okay. Oh, sorry, Imad. I got that one on the screen for you eventually. Well, Ireland beat West Indies in the one-day years. I would have thought the West Indies are still a slightly better team than Ireland. Ireland haven't been a very good... So this is when we kind of overreact to what's been happening, of recent times. Ireland haven't been a particularly good T20 team. They didn't make the second round a year ago. And that was after almost being gifted a result in the first game, right? So Curtis Camper taking 4 wickets in 4 balls made that game, over. So they were disappointing last tournament. So I don't think we should overreact to that. And it also depends on whether you mean a full-strength West Indies team. Is that including Hetmeyer, Sunil Narayan and Dre Russ? Although, at least 2 of those will never see in a World Cup again. We might not see any of them in a World Cup again. But, I think, pound for pound, they've still got that. But I don't think there's as much difference between those teams as there probably should be. As they should be, considering the funding and the advantages the West Indies have had. But it's almost a separate question, because West Indies is falling apart at the moment as a team, and the others are not. If you go back to the 2019 World Cup, I thought Afghanistan were falling apart as a team during that World Cup, and the last World T20 Ireland fell apart. So, these things happen, and then teams get better, and then teams get worse, and all those sorts of things happen. So there will be some changes in West Indies cricket coming up. I think West Indies at 99.94 just put a podcast up about Puran, so certainly go over and check that one out. But there's no doubt that there's a lot going on with West Indies cricket at the moment. Sorry. Memo says, what do you think about a system over DLS using AI? Yeah, so a few people have tried these sorts of things before. I don't think you can factor in the players. I don't think that's particularly fair. You can only factor in what has gone on in the game so far. But there are actually other things you've looked at. Vishal Misra, who invented ball by ball on Cricinfo, is someone I know who's done it. I think there's a few other people that have looked at it as well. I've never run the numbers on any of the other systems. I know that the one concern that people have with DLS, especially in T20 cricket, but also in one-day cricket, is that it isn't actually that accurate at predicting the winner of the game. And that's because it wasn't really designed for that. And it was designed before we had match predictors in WinViz and all these sorts of things. Whereas if you actually look, if you have it was really designed to make sure that there was still, when they came back after the rain, a good game of cricket that could be played. Whether there's a middle ground between those two things of, well, wait a minute, this team is massively in front at this stage in the game, and most teams would never lose from that position, but then it rained, through to we still need a good game when we come back out. I don't know, but it's not something I've just done any research on. So there's no doubt that DLS is not the best system in the world that probably could be used, but whether there is another one out there at the moment which is good enough that would change the ICC or the cricket bodies around the world, I don't know. I was hoping that with all these franchise leagues, a lot more leagues would pay some mathematicians and statisticians and, I don't know, chaositicians. Sorry, that's a Jurassic Park reference, isn't it? To try and look into all this sort of stuff. There's so much data in the game now, right? It should have been easier. It just feels like everyone's just gone with DLS more often than not at the moment, or slight variations of it. And certainly at the moment, it's not ideal. Carnival of Sorts says, it's time to implement some sort of a Euro Cup. Yeah, I mean, the ECB probably wouldn't be interested in the idea if that's your question. I wonder if you could sell it to the ECB though, if you said that it was that they could send the Lions team rather than their main team. I don't know if that changes the way that they would think about it. Obviously, there was a franchise. There's been two. There's been the North Oil first class system, which they tried to get in, which was going to have 2 or 3 first class teams from Ireland, Netherlands, and Scotland all playing together. Out, keeping a separate competition, which was a great idea, but just never happened. And then the second one was, of course, the Euro Slam, Euro Thrash, the Euro whatever it was. I should know because I was working in it. I mean, as much as you can work in a competition that never existed. But I've got an Edinburgh Rock shirt somewhere, so that's going to be worth quite a few pennies one day. 7. So yes, I think their best situation is to try and get that together, especially, hoping that, I don't know, Italy or Germany, one of these other Spain, Denmark, whoever it is, we have another couple, Iceland, all those sorts of other places. There is a possibility for that. I just think it's tough to pull off financially, across all those different things. And so from that perspective, I certainly think that it was... it's one of those things that sounds great. I'm not sure they're ever going to be able to pull it off. There's also a big problem with the professionalism. If you just go to those 3 boards, Ireland's quite professional, Scotland's not really that professional, and I think Netherlands is probably below them. And that was where some of the issues came when they had the T20 competition as well, which was one board was kind of ready and active, and the others really are just not. I mean, they're not very well run, the other 2 teams, if we're being honest, from a professional standpoint, and that does cause issues. Ken Yazani says, did Milan play a match-losing innings? Yeah, I didn't want to get into this one too much. I mean, yes, mathematically, certainly. I think that would be hard. I think that would be hard to argue anything else. I don't think he played it though. I think it was more of a. I look at it as match-losing innings, and this is just my way of looking at it. It's slightly different, of a player who is knocking the ball around when they should be going for it. I'm not sure that was Milan's problem today. I think he just struggled to actually get the ball away, which is more like the Aaron Finch one, I would have thought. And Aaron Finch's innings didn't lose the match, right? And, sometimes those things can happen. That's slightly different from the sort of innings that I would be talking about, where a batter is, there was one game where I was an analyst where we had a player who decided after the power play that they were going to knock the ball around, and they were like getting full tosses from spinners and knocking it down to long 1 for 1, like not even trying to find a gap and get a two, or anything like that. Those are the kind of innings that I think are completely different. I'm not sure that Milan's can 100% goes down, and I've been very harsh on Milan over the years, as everyone will know. The sort of nonsense about him being the world's #1 batter and all that sort of stuff, mind blowing. But in this particular case, I wondered if it wasn't more conditions based. And look, Shan Masood was certainly another one. As I said, Aaron Finch. We've had a few players just get completely stuck in innings, and it hasn't cost their team. And today it probably does. So if you're looking at it purely from that perspective, it's a match losing innings. But I don't think that's what I would characterize as a match losing innings. I think it's when you're chasing 10 runs and over and someone's going at a run a ball for the first 20 balls, hoping that they will catch up later and go ballistic, when numbers tell you that very rarely do players catch up at that rate where they can make enough of a difference. That's the kinds of innings that I would have a problem with. Or you're batting on a really good batting pitch, and instead of putting pressure on the opposition, you just knock it around in the first innings, and the other team come out and pick your total off in 14 overs, and your 70 off 50 balls looks great, but when the other team's scoring at 2 runs a ball, it's a bit silly. What that could be is more of an old-fashioned innings by Dawid Malan, which is he just wasn't batting very good and he didn't like that pitch, and the bowlers bowled really well. As I said in the video, I thought the bowlers bowled outstandingly from lengths. You can just almost look at that straight away and see the difference there. Let's just see whatever else we've got in here. England now have to win against Australia, New Zealand, and Sri Lanka. This has literally become a group of death. I think it's a group of chaos at Jinka. It would be my thing. I mean, that's why I focused on it. I think it's really, really interesting because it's a group of death. Is everyone is so good that you're not sure who's going to win. And that's kind of what we thought we had, a mini group of death with New Zealand, England, and Australia at the top. It's become a lot more chaotic than just a group of death at this point, hasn't it? It's become one of those situations of we don't know who the second and third best teams are going to be in 1 game's time, certainly in 2 games' time. We may not be able to. I'm trying to remember what the next games are after that. So it's New Zealand, Sri Lanka, and then you've got Australia, Ireland, England, New Zealand. So yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot going on in that particular group. So I do see it as more chaotic than your sort of traditional group of death. But again, I'm quibbling over terms that don't really mean anything here. But yeah, it's going to be fun. Does Bangladesh have a chance against South Africa? Omar asks. The problem with that matchup for Bangladesh is that I'm not sure what surface could be put out where Bangladesh is going to have an advantage with their bowlers, because South Africa is also very good with their spin. And Bangladesh's problem is probably making good runs, and they're going to be going up against potentially 4 or 5 frontline bowler attack as usual, of which should have the edge on them. I find it hard to see, other than something extreme, as we saw today, where England completely misread everything, which can happen. Bangladesh are not a terrible team. I didn't think Bangladesh played particularly well against the Netherlands, though. So it's hard for me to take the leap from there to South Africa. Having said that, they looked over the moon, more confident. All those things matter at the end of the day. It may not matter, when Nortje and Rabada are bowling at 90 miles an hour, if we're being honest. I think their best chance of winning is probably very similar to what happened the other day, which is that Taskin Ahmed takes wickets up top, and then the Fizz has the ability to cause havoc throughout the rest of the game. I suppose the Fizz didn't really do that, but that's the perfect combination of Bangladesh as a bowling lineup. As a batting lineup, I don't know. They just have to get a total that I think gives their bowlers enough of a chance. Is probably they can't score 144 again, right? It has to be 150, 155, 160, which should be within their range, but traditionally has not been within their range. And I put it up on the screen the other day that Bangladesh have just struggled in T20 cricket over the last 3 years. Of all the teams in this tournament, they have the worst win-loss ratio. That's not an accident. Just seeing what else we have here. Jay says, Ireland bowling is very interesting, especially their leg spinner, Delaney. Yeah, I mean, Adair is a really good bowler who I think hasn't been tested enough at the top level for us to know just how good he is. His numbers are ridiculous, but his numbers are propped up by a lot of cricket against suboptimal, top 4 units. But a bit like Boovy, he can swing the balls both ways. Anyone who can swing the ball both ways on purpose is a bit, at a certain point, it's almost like a leg spinner, isn't it? It's a big advantage to have because it's just hard for you to line them up. Josh Little, I think a lot's been made of him. There are many other teams in this World Cup, that would like to have Josh Little available to them over the next 5 years in T20 cricket. Left arm fast, also good at bowling over the wicket and around the wicket, which I think is going to be a really interesting thing for him to go ahead. Then they've got, Dockrell and Camphor in their top 6, top 7. I'm trying to remember their batting order now. And Sterling, if they need it. So they've got a lot of all-round sort of combinations that they can try there. Delaney probably bats around 7, doesn't he? Again, none of those are frontline bowlers, but they can all do different jobs in different conditions, which I think is really, really interesting. I mean, you're talking about in that top 7, there's off spin, there's left arm finger spin, there's wrist spin, and there's a nippy sort of medium fast bowler, right? That's a lot of options that it allows for them to have. So from that perspective, I really like it. I think Ireland's biggest problem for me, it's interesting you say the swing. Look, the swing is a problem, but they can also seam it around a little bit. So I don't think they just need swing. I kind of wonder what happens when they regularly get into the death. And I've seen them play a lot, obviously, in the last 18 months, 2 years now, commentated on quite a bit of their cricket, watched quite a bit of their other series. I don't know if they have Josh Little may eventually be their death bowler and maybe a very good bowler. I'm not sure if they have anyone else there that I'd be confident in throwing the ball to. And so that's where I worry about Ireland's bowling going ahead. But they can put enough pressure on you at different times. And there's, they've not got a gun spinner, but they have multiple spin options, and you hope that the pitch favors one of those on any day. It's an interesting team. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Let's see what else we got. Adam says, Wokes at this level is a wonky bowling machine that can't change its settings. So the thing about Wokes is that this should be his ideal World Cup. He should be able to get a little bit of extra bounce. The seam has started to move around a little bit for more than normal. He's just not bowling very well. I think coming into that last World Cup, he hadn't played much. There's a little bit of Mitchell Stark about it. There are times when Chris Wokes has been a very good white ball bowler. He's gone into the IPL before, and he, but he just hasn't played enough T20 cricket to, I think, get into a rhythm that he knows what he's doing. He made mistake today, just made mistakes. So I'm not too particularly worried about that. But this is a tournament where hitting a good length is absolutely dominating for bowlers. This is a seam bowling tournament at the moment, right? And as we currently sit here, he's just given away a really good pitch and been embarrassed by, what's Mark Adair? He's probably bowls a slightly fuller length than Chris Wokes. He's slightly slower, swings it a little bit more, but they're similar kinds of bowlers, right? So I think that I think that Wokes will be upset, but I don't think that means that that's the end of him. But at the same time, like the last World Cup, he probably wouldn't be in this side if they had a full strength bowling lineup. That's what happens when you start to get to your substitutes, right? Jay says, unrelated to the matches, but are you going to be doing a power rankings video for this World Cup? Yeah, we did it in the last World Cup, and it didn't work brilliantly just because of the way the tournaments come together. I was thinking maybe after everyone has played 3 games, I might try and bring something together. So we might have a World Cup mood board, power rankings, but it's after 3 games. Honestly, Joe, I just have to work out if it's done. If you've never seen it before, it's something that happens quite a lot in American sports, and we've been trying it. We do it in the IPL. It works a lot better in the IPL, of course, just because it's a longer league and it's easier to be able to do that. But as it currently stands, I think if we're going to do our power rankings, it'll be 1. Imagine trying to do power rankings on Group 1 at the moment, by the way. That would be horrendous. Ananda says, England were just unlucky in this game. When England started batting, it was sunny and the pitch was conducive to stroke play. They took advantage of the power play because they could. Well, they weren't unlucky, and I'll tell you why. Mark Wood wasn't particularly happy with the way they had bowled. And you look at that pitch map, and it's quite clear that they didn't see that there was something going on with this wicket. A little bit of rain obviously could have changed it. I don't think it could have changed it that much, because if you look at the early deliveries that England were bowling in that game, the pitch was doing stuff like that as well. But England never settled in on a really good length where they could exploit the pitch in a way that Ireland did. Ireland didn't bowl any Yorkers at all, right? They weren't even going for anything like that. So, yes, but that happens in T20 cricket. You know, if you're the favorite for the tournament and you're going up against a team who before today were about 250 to 1 to win the tournament, right? You should be able to overcome that, right? They're not sitting in the England change room at the moment going, oh, we're a bit unlucky there. Well, someone will be, because there's always someone in a change room doing that, as we all know from club cricket. But overall, that's not the situation, right? That's not how it's going to be. They're going to be sitting there going, we made a bunch of mistakes today. And they did. Let's just see what else we've got here. Jinky says, do you think they should play a 5-over match instead of DLS on the next day? They can't play on the next day. This whole next day thing, the schedule doesn't allow for it. There's no way they can have reserve days for everyone else. This is a machine. This is cricket tournaments like this, and all basketball and football tournaments like this as well, work like rock concerts. Everything has to move at the right time. You know, the trucks have to get packed at this time. All those sorts of things. The cameras have to be moved. The teams have to be in a new location. You have to prepare for your next game and everything else. We can't have reserve days all the way through the tournament, the way that we pack it in. Now, you can argue that there are many other problems with that. You know, it's hard to say. There's no real reason to play 2 games at one venue on the same day, other than the fact that it's cheaper for the ICC. And that causes a problem when there is rain in that game. They could have still, in this particular case, it wouldn't have mattered because the rain came in so much that was pretty much the end of the day. But theoretically, the rain could have lessened off and they could have played that game later on. But they're not doing that because of money. Also, the ICC would say that if you have 2 games in a venue on the one day, you have the ability then to get more fans in. I'm not sure that's true. My favorite one was in Kardinia Park, of course, where Sri Lanka would play the early games and be a really cool little crowd. And then Sri Lanka would stop playing and everyone just drove back up to Mill Park in Springvale. That's a real joke for people who know Sri Lanka cricket migration in Melbourne, which is kind of my target audience, I think. What else we got here? I'll just go. Mohit says, is DLS an unfair system for a team like England who bat deep to number 10? I don't think. Someone else said the other system. Was it VJD is the other system? Yeah. Wait, I'll just throw that one up as well. I think all of those systems are going to favor, as far as I understand how they work. You might be right there, Mohit. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd have to go through and do the numbers. I don't think that matters or not at a certain point, because I think there has to be a match between the wickets and the runs anyway. And if you have a longer batting lineup, that means that you should be able to go harder and stay further ahead of the rates, theoretically, in that situation. It's a really interesting question. I probably won't look it up, but if there's anyone out there who wants to do the maths on that, it would be really interesting to see if that is correct. What else do we have here? Ryan says, if Ireland beat Afghanistan, they go to top of the league. So when did they play? Ireland beat Afghanistan. Sorry, where is that? So that's on the 28th, the early game at the MCG. As I said, I think Afghanistan and Ireland should be looking at this group, and certainly Sri Lanka. But I think Sri Lanka would have, if they can get a fit person on the field. A fully fit Sri Lanka right now would be quite interesting to see this group, by the way, Jarrod, but we dare to dream. I think Afghanistan and Ireland should be looking at this going, this next game is like if we're calling Australia, England a quarterfinal, what do we call Afghanistan, Ireland? Like a round of 16 knockout game, right? If one of them can win that game, it's a really, really interesting group from here on in for that team, right? Obviously, the other one, probably not so much. But whoever wins it from there, I think can put pressure on. They might still end up 4th or 5th in the group. But there's no doubt that if Ireland specifically, just because they now have the win over England, they have a really good chance of that. I'd be shocked if they made it to the semi-final just because I've seen a lot of Ireland play, and I think they are capable of very good things, but I also think they're going to struggle. The one thing I would say is New Zealand have a very good spin bowling attack. Australia have, I'm probably only going to pick Ashton Agar or Zampa, although Agar might have done him out of that side at the moment. I know Agar, he was injured, but Australia doesn't have a very good spin bowling attack, right? So they have a chance in that Australian team because that isn't their problem. That isn't going to be the same problem. Doesn't mean Australia can't score too many runs or their fast bowlers can't blow them out and all those sorts of things. But spin bowling is the biggest issue for Ireland when they're batting. New Zealand do have good spinners, so they can put some pressure on them. And Afghanistan do have good spinners. So that is slightly different. I think they need a lot of things going in their favour, Ireland. But having looked at what we've seen so far in this World Cup, if you said to me right now that one of Sri Lanka, Ireland, and Afghanistan made it to the semi-finals, I'd be shocked. But I'd also be like, wow, Group 1 is a shit show. So maybe that just happened. I don't know. But yeah, it's a really good one. Yeah, I didn't get UV. You sent back through the message about Junior Malinga, whose name is, oh God, I should know it. Someone's going to say it in the comments. It's going to annoy me. But he's come over. So they brought 3 substitutes because they need bodies at the moment over. I'm not sure if anyone's gone into the squad directly. I think it might just be backups, but they needed 3 more backups. So at this stage, yeah, that's where we are. That dude says 4 wins guarantees qualification. It is possible, looking at this group, that we may not have a team with 4 wins, though. I mean, it's unlikely, but it is possible. Weirdly enough, of course, South Africa got 4 wins in the last World Cup and didn't qualify, which tells you how much different this group is to that particular group from last time. Just seeing if there's anything else here. Brandon says, should Ellis have been in the squad for Australia? So I think this one only makes sense if we look ahead later on and the death bowling isn't working. I really like Nathan Ellis, and he gets incredible drop on his deliveries. He's putting so many revs on his slower balls. It's ridiculous. But I think that's only he can't come in for Hazelwood. So whoever he comes in for, it lessens the batting a little bit. With Agar in the side, potentially going ahead, that they might change their decision, which is fair. Also saying a lot of things about Cameron Green coming in for Finch or even Cummins. I see that's punchy. But would I drop Finch for Green? Well, if I do that, what am I doing midway through my tournament? There's 2 big parts of this. First is that Finch is the captain, and that's huge. I mean, if they were going to do it, they should have done it before, really. Doing it in the World Cup is weird. The second is that as good a player as Green is, this is becoming more and more a World Cup for the Aaron Finch innings, the Shan Masood innings, the Craig Irvine innings, the Kusal Mendes innings, the Virat Kohli innings, right? If Green comes in and he's just told to hit. I'm not. I mean, maybe the pitches change, and maybe the ball stops dominating. But I thought beforehand this was going to be a good one for the ball with this new white ball. I didn't think it would quite be like this. I think it currently has the lowest bowling average of any World Cup ever. It might be the lowest economy. I would expect some of those things to go back up, especially when they get away from the MCG pitch at this point. But so it makes it a little bit confusing, I think, for the whole green Finch part of it there, especially if you're bringing green in to hit. But they're not bad questions. I'm just not sure that there's a great answer. It's a huge, huge decision to make if you're Cricket Australia to do that. This is a really good question. Harry, are dedicated death bowlers necessary to win a T20 competition? So I would have said for most World Cups we've ever seen, yes. The thing that happens at the death that's really interesting is that you look at the end of a tournament and you'll have one team who's gone at 6 or 7 runs and over at the death, and they've had a really good tournament. Another team that's gone at 12 or 14. The extremes at the death are really important. This particular World Cup, as it's being played right now, and this may be completely different in a week or 2 weeks' time, but as it's being played right now, this particular World Cup, I would say, is not as important for death bowlers. I think the most important bowlers at the moment, which is generally the case, are people who can take wickets up front. I think everything else is not as important. I would say as we currently go at the moment, I would say it's not as important, but it might be going ahead. And it's just because of that discrepancy. We're just going to play a brief ad, and then we'll be back in a moment to go through. I just want to read some of the questions. So Muku's going to play an ad for 99.94 while I just read through and see if there's anything else here worth having a chat about.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
We certainly do. Basket says, whose was more chancy innings, Shah Masood versus India or Finch versus Sri Lanka? I think for actual chances, it would be Masood's. But Masood was a lot more in control of what he was doing. That's more the kind of player he is, whereas Finch was trying to belt the ball everywhere, right? It was a little bit different there. Sports Breakdown says, do you see Tamal Mills getting a chance at some point instead of Mark Wood? I don't think necessarily that is the case. They should be playing different roles in this team, so it shouldn't be a like-for-like situation that they move one for the other. So I do think it's a little bit different there from that perspective. Here we go. Patharana, that's who I was going through before. So Patharana is coming out for Sri Lanka. Thanks, Sports Breakdown. So there is a chance that he might play for Sri Lanka. I don't know where their current injuries are. Obviously, Estelle covers it for Sri Lanka on 99.94. I haven't sent her a message to ask what the latest update is. I think she's sick and tired of me asking who's fit and who's not. So that is a little bit different. I've answered that one before. Oh, I like this one by Tom. Yes, I think it's unlikely because I have another look. I think CricViz are updating the percentage chance. So I think England still have a 37% chance of qualifying. Is that right? For the semi-finals. I'm not sure what Australia's percentage is. On the bookies, Australia are slightly behind. So I don't know if that means that they're lower or higher when it comes to percentage. But yes, no, I mean, New Zealand can certainly miss out on it. I would say that I would almost expect at this stage that New Zealand qualifies with one of Australia, England, Sri Lanka, I suppose, than anyone else at the moment. But yes, there's no doubt that there is a chance that could happen. But I do think that, I mean, they are second favourite, I think, to win World Cup at the moment. So that tells you that the money and the bookies both think that there's a big chance that they'll go through, which I think is fair. Australian summer Naveen starts in December. And so generally, and you got to remember that Australia is so big that it has different climates in different parts of the country. So Geelong, Melbourne, and Hobart's climates are nothing like Brisbane climates or Perth's climates as well. In those other places, you can basically play cricket all year round, like you can in parts of Asia outside of the rainy seasons, up north in Australia, and in the winter in Melbourne and Geelong and Geelong is Melbourne. Sorry, Geelong, but and Hobart you can't. So they're very different when it comes to seasons and everything else. That's why it should, if this is just an early season thing, it should affect the teams in the southern part of Australia. The grounds in the southern part of Australia a lot more than it will the rest of the tournament. But who knows? Let's just see whatever else is going on here. I think we've answered most of this today. See if there's anything else. I've already talked to food. I don't know what your handle is. Foodie. If you want to have a look about Jarrod Milan, I've done a video on Jarrod Milan that would have come out probably start of 2021. But if you put Jarrod Milan, Jarrod Kimber, or into the search or whatever, you'll find it. Look, he plays a catch-up innings, and it means he ends up with high averages, and he wins a lot of games, and he probably loses a lot of games, and he makes a lot of runs. But I think his international record is down to when he's played, and not luck is the wrong word, but when you look at his total T20, he's nowhere near the player that we've seen at international level, and there are going to be times when he's going to struggle. He's not an elite player, and if he was, he would be in every IPL team and one of the highest paid players in the world. He's not there for a reason. Let's just have a look. Let's just see what else we have. Last two. Sports Breakdown says, why should he keep struggling with his batting recently? I think he's just old. He had a really good period in the IPL where I thought he did brilliantly batting at number 4, number 5, coming in, throwing his bat at Kolkata against the spinners on ragging pitches that he and Sunil Narine then dominated on. But he's no longer the Shakib Al Hasan that he was even around 2019. Certainly not the one that we saw who dominated white ball cricket for such a long time. And he's just moved on a little bit when it comes to age and everything else. And I have one last question. I've lost it. Oh. Sia Square says, Bangladesh don't use their batting resources smartly. How about sending their batters up the order? I think he means bowlers up the order. Be really interesting. Of all the tournaments ever, this tournament is either the one that you should most use pinch hitters or the one you should least use pinch hitters. And by that I mean, at a certain point, if your top order batters aren't doing particularly well, you do not throw other players up. But the converse to that is that so far, a lot of the best wins we've seen have come from real batsmanship. Is that a word? Feels like it should be a word. A battership? No, that's not a word. Battleship? But yeah, real batting craft, right, is where we've seen a lot of these games actually dominated. Balbirnie today, for instance. If you throw up a couple of pinch hitters, anything can happen. I think unless you have someone who has a particular skill set that is useful to you in a David Willey, Sunil Narine style, I think more often than not, pinch hitters are a problem. But that's it for me today. Thank you very much. Remember, all that we've now got Australia on 99.94. So there's that new podcast with Melinda Farrell and Bharat Sundaresan. We've got another one coming out very soon. Obviously, there's Mitch Johnson one out there. There's Sri Lanka. There's England. There's where else? South Africa, India, Pakistan. No, Pakistan yet. Soon, hopefully. Bangladesh even sooner, hopefully. So we're trying to get everyone, but we're not quite got there yet. But follow us on 99.94 for all that, and thank you very much. We'll be back on the mood board same time. It actually won't be same time tomorrow, is it? Tomorrow's got a late game in Perth. Damn you, Perth. So we'll be on a little bit later, but we'll be here every day live for the World Cup. We will do the live show to start with, where we go through, and me and Charlie go through everything that's happened in the World Cup that day, and then afterwards, I'll take your questions for as long as I can. Today, I thought I'd do a little bit extra because we're running early thanks to the rain in Melbourne. Thank you, Melbourne. Ruining the World Cup, but meaning that I'm finished half an hour early today. So isn't that what your hometown's really about? But yeah, like, subscribe, share. The more people you tell about this, the better. But thank you to everyone, and I'll see you again here tomorrow on the World Cup Mood Board on 99.94.